She was sitting on the floor of the departure terminal when he found her. Not on a chair, not on a bench. On the cold, polished floor of Narita International Airport, her back pressed against a pillar, her carry-on bag pulled tight against her knees, her coat buttoned all the way up even though the building was warm. She had one hand pressed flat against her stomach, not casually, not absently, but with the kind of pressure that meant something. And her eyes, when a man in a dark suit crouched down to her level and asked if she was all right, were the eyes of someone who had already decided she was not going to cry anymore. She had used all her tears somewhere between the hotel and the taxi. She had nothing left for strangers. The man was not supposed to be at that airport. That is the part of this story that matters most. Not that he found her, but that he was not looking for her. He had no reason to stop. He had a flight to catch, a meeting in Osaka that could not be rescheduled, a world of obligations and weight that most people will never understand. And yet he stopped. He crouched down. He asked if she was all right in careful, deliberate English, as if he had noticed that she was foreign before he had noticed anything else. She told him she was fine. She looked him directly in the eyes and lied to him with every cell of her body. And something in his expression shifted, not with pity, not with discomfort the way most people look when they want to help, but would rather not get involved. He looked at her the way someone looks at a problem they already know the shape of, even before they know the details. He looked at her like he was going to stay. That decision changed everything. But before we get to the airport, before we get to the man in the dark suit and the question he asked and the silence that came after it, we need to go back to where this story really begins. Because this is not a love story about a dramatic rescue. This is a story about a woman who had spent 3 years slowly disappearing, and what happens when someone finally sees you at the exact moment you've decided you don't want to be found. If you've never been told to make yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger, stay with me. This one is for you. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe. This story is the kind that stays with you long after it ends. Her name was Nadia. She was 28 years old, a structural translator working for an international architectural firm based in Sao Paulo, which meant she spent her professional life converting not just words, but entire systems of meaning, legal codes, technical standards, cultural assumptions baked into the way different countries conceptualized space and structure. She was precise, she was thorough, and she had a rare ability to understand things that most people found impenetrable. Her colleagues respected her. Her clients trusted her. She was, in her professional world, someone who mattered. In her personal life, she had made a different kind of translation. She had taken the version of herself that was confident and sharp and inconveniently direct, and she had translated it into something quieter, something more palatable, something that fit better inside the life of a man named Davy. Davy was charming in the way that certain men are charming, not because they are particularly warm, but because they are very good at making you feel chosen. He had an easy laugh. He knew the right restaurants. He spoke about the future with the casual certainty of someone who expected it to cooperate with his plans. When Nadia met him at a conference in Buenos Aires 3 years before the airport, she was 30 minutes from catching her own flight home, when he stopped her to say he had noticed her across the room for the past hour, and that it would be a personal tragedy if they did not at least exchange numbers. She missed her flight. She had never done anything like that in her life, and that newness felt like the beginning of something extraordinary. In the early months it was. She was not naive about that. She was not someone who rewrote the beginning to match the ending. There had been real tenderness in those first months, real laughter, real moments where she had felt seen and delighted in and genuinely loved. She held on to the truth of that, even when everything else fell apart. It made the falling apart harder, actually. The shift was so gradual that she had no clean moment to point to. It was not one event. It was 1,000 small adjustments. The first time he interrupted a story she was telling at dinner with his friends and redirected the conversation so smoothly that she was the only one who noticed. The first time he suggested, gently with complete plausibility, that maybe the way she handled a difficult client had been a little aggressive. The first time she apologized for something she could not, if pressed, identify as her fault. The first time she made herself small on purpose because she had learned that taking up too much space made the evening harder than it needed to be. She moved to Tokyo 18 months into the relationship because his firm opened a regional office there, and he asked her to come. She told herself it was an adventure. She had always wanted to live abroad. She spoke passable Japanese from a university linguistics elective, and her company agreed to let her work remotely with occasional travel. It made sense on paper. It made sense in every way except the one that did not have a name yet. In Tokyo, she was completely isolated. She had no friends of her own, no colleagues she could have coffee with, no casual network of people who had known her before Davy. There was only him and his colleagues, and the version of herself she presented in his presence. She found the city beautiful and strange and enormous. She walked for hours some days just to feel the scale of a place that had no opinion about her. She ate alone in small ramen shops where the seats faced the wall, and she did not find that depressing. She found it honest. When she discovered she was pregnant, she was 11 weeks along. She had attributed the symptoms to stress and a new climate, and by the time she bought the test at a pharmacy near Shinjuku Station, she was already far enough along that denial was not an option. She sat in the bathroom of their apartment for a long time, with the test face down on the edge of the sink. She did not flip it over for 40 minutes. When she finally did, she understood immediately that this information was going to cost her something. She did not know yet exactly what. She told Davy on a Tuesday evening, quietly after dinner, with the same directness she brought to everything. She told him she was pregnant. She told him she was scared, and also, underneath the fear, something that surprised her. She was not unhappy. She told him that she understood this was complicated, and that she wanted to talk through it with him, whatever that meant for both of them. She used careful words. She had prepared them. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he needed time to think. She said, of course. She cleared the table and washed the dishes and waited. He came back 40 minutes later and said he thought this was not the right time. He said the word arrangement in a way that she did not understand at first, and when she asked him to clarify, he clarified. He thought it would be best if the pregnancy did not continue. He said this with the same tone he used when he recommended a different restaurant from the one she had suggested. Reasonable, considered, already decided. She did not raise her voice. She was not built for scenes, but something in her went very, very still in a way that frightened her because she recognized it. It was the same stillness that came right before she understood something she could not undo. She told him she would think about it. She went to the bedroom. She did not sleep. Over the following 2 weeks, the apartment became a different kind of place. Davy was not cruel. That was the most difficult part. He was not threatening, not violent, not openly manipulative in ways she could hold up to the light and say, "Look, this is wrong." He was simply absent. He worked late. He gave her space, he called it. And the word space in his mouth had the quality of a room slowly losing air. He mentioned once that his family would not understand. He mentioned again that the timing was not right for either of them. He mentioned that the apartment lease was in his name and that her work visa was tied to residency status, and he did not say these things as threats. He said them as facts, as the outline of a reality she needed to understand. She understood it. She had always been very good at understanding things other people left unsaid. On a Friday morning, while he was at the office, she packed one bag. She packed with the precision of someone who had been thinking about this for longer than 2 weeks, which was not true. She had not consciously planned any of it until the night before, but her hands knew what to take: her passport, her laptop, a small frame with a photograph of her mother, already gone 5 years, that she had carried to every apartment she'd ever lived in, 2 sweaters, her translation certifications, folded inside a manila envelope, a small notebook she had been filling with observations about Tokyo that she had never shown anyone, cash from a private account she had kept since long before Davy, a habit her mother had taught her. Always have your own money, always. She booked a flight home to São Paulo with a connection through Los Angeles. The first available seat with reasonable fare was a same-day departure out of Narita. She took it. She called a taxi. She did not leave a note. She was not running away. That is what she told herself in the back of the taxi as Tokyo moved past the window in the particular grey of a November morning. She was not running from anything. She was running toward something. She just did not know yet what it was. She had 4 months of pregnancy ahead of her, a life that needed to be completely rebuilt, a professional reputation that was entirely intact and entirely insufficient to carry what was coming. She was terrified and completely sober about it, and she thought, "This is the truest I have felt in 3 years." And then the taxi stopped in traffic, and the driver said something in Japanese she did not fully catch, and she felt the first real wave of nausea she had allowed herself to feel all morning, and she put her hand flat against her stomach, and she thought, "I don't know what I'm doing. I genuinely do not know what I'm doing." She arrived at Narita 2 hours before her flight. She checked in. She cleared security. She found her gate. And then, somewhere between the gate and the moment of boarding, something that she could only describe later as a kind of wall came down inside her. She sat down on the floor next to a pillar because the chairs felt too formal for what she was feeling, and she pressed her bag against her knees, and she breathed. That was where he found her. His name was Kenji Mori. He was 41 years old. He was the head of a business conglomerate with interests in real estate, private logistics, and several categories of commerce that his company's official documentation described in language careful enough to mean almost anything. Outside of official documentation, the people who understood the shape of his world knew him by a different kind of reputation. Not as a criminal exactly, because Kenji Mori had not been a man who committed crimes in the ordinary sense for more than a decade. But he had inherited leadership of the Morigumi at 32, when his father died unexpectedly, and he had spent the 9 years since then methodically and quietly building a structure that existed in the space between the formal economy and everything else. He was respected, he was feared. He was, in the private language of the people who moved in his circles, a man whose word was the only contract that mattered. He had 2 daughters from a marriage that had ended, amicably because Kenji Mori did not do things carelessly, even when he failed at them, 6 years earlier. He saw his daughters every 2 weeks. He had dinners with his ex-wife twice a year because she was a good person, and they had built something together that deserved respect even after it was over. He did not date. He did not have the kind of life that admitted romance without complication, and he had decided, somewhere around year 38, that he was not willing to offer complication to anyone who did not fully understand what they were accepting. He was walking through the terminal with one aide, no luggage beyond a thin attaché case, heading to his gate, already moving through the mental architecture of the meeting in Osaka, when he saw her on the floor. He stopped because of her hand. He would tell her this later, much later, and she would look at him for a long moment and say that she did not understand, and he would say, "The way you had your hand on your stomach. It was not casual. It was protective. And it was completely at odds with your face, which was trying very hard to look like someone who did not need anything from anyone." He crouched down. He asked if she was all right in English. She said she was fine. He looked at her, and he did not move. He said, "You are clearly not fine, and I apologize for noticing, but I am going to ask again. Is there something I can do?" She stared at him. Nobody had asked her that question in a very long time. She had forgotten what it felt like to have it pointed directly at her, with no agenda attached to it. Her throat tightened. She shook her head. He looked at the gate behind her and looked back at her and said he had a few minutes before he needed to board. He sat down on the floor next to her. Not nearby. Next to her. She almost laughed. A man in a suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, sitting cross-legged on the floor of Narita Airport, looking at her like he had nowhere else to be. She said, "You don't have to do this." He said, "I know." She said, "I'm fine, really." He said, "You are clearly an excellent liar, but you have been crying recently, and you are alone and pregnant in an airport, and you don't look like someone who made any of those choices casually." She went very still. He met her eyes without looking away. She said, "How did you know?" He said he had raised 2 daughters. He had a look, he said, for a certain kind of bone-deep exhaustion. He did not say anything else. She talked for 11 minutes. She did not mean to talk for 11 minutes. She meant to say nothing. But there was something about a stranger who already knew the shape of your situation that removed the requirement of explanation, and without explanation standing between her and the truth, The truth came out sideways, not as a confession, not as a breakdown, but as a series of flat, precise statements. She was pregnant. She was leaving. The father did not want the child, and she did not want to stay where she was not wanted. She was going home. She did not entirely know what home meant anymore, but she had a flight and a passport and her own money, and those three things together felt like enough of a foundation to build from. He listened to all of it without interrupting. He did not offer comfort of the reassuring kind, the kind that requires the other person to slightly minimize what they've said in order to accept the comfort. He just listened. When she finished, he said, "That took a great deal of courage." She said she did not feel courageous. He said courage never feels like courage from the inside. It only looks like courage from the outside, which is why you usually need someone else to name it for you. His aide appeared at his shoulder and said something quiet in Japanese. He responded also quietly. The aide stepped back. He looked at Nadia and said his flight had begun boarding. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a business card on the floor between them. Not handed to her, placed, which gave her the choice of picking it up or not. He said, "If you need anything when you land, or after you land, or whenever." He stood, straightened his jacket and looked down at her for one more moment, with that same clear, unperturbed gaze. Then he said, "You were right to leave. Anyone who made you doubt that was wrong." He walked toward his gate. She sat with the card between her fingers for a long time. Then she put it in the pocket closest to her chest. She landed in São Paulo 22 hours later, after a delay in Los Angeles that left her sleeping across 3 chairs in the terminal, her coat over her like a blanket, her hand on her stomach in the way that had apparently been visible from across a room to someone paying enough attention. She took a taxi to the apartment of her oldest friend Camilla, who had known Nadia since they were 17, and who opened the door at 2 in the morning without question, took one look at her and said, "I'll make tea. Come in," which was, in that moment, the most complete sentence in the world. She stayed with Camilla for a month while she rebuilt. She told Camilla the whole story over 3 separate evenings, in pieces, the way you tell a story you are still partly afraid of. Camilla listened and swore precisely when swearing was warranted, and asked no questions that were not her business. Nadia reopened her professional accounts, re-established contact with her network, and within 3 weeks had 2 contract offers for remote translation work. Her body was adjusting to the pregnancy with the kind of matter-of-fact insistence she was learning to appreciate, not asking permission, simply proceeding. She had an appointment with an obstetrician. She had a growing list of things to learn. She felt, against all reasonable expectation, like herself. Davi called 4 times in the first 2 weeks. She answered once because she felt she owed him a clear ending and had no interest in ambiguity. He said he had been thinking. He said perhaps he had been hasty. She said she had not been. He said he wanted to talk about it properly. She said there was nothing left to talk about and wished him well. She meant it, which surprised her a little. She was not angry. She had moved past the place where anger lived. She was simply outside of something that had been for a long time slowly suffocating her, and the air on this side was extraordinary. She did not contact Kenji Mori. She kept the card. She looked at it sometimes, not with longing, but with the quality of attention you give to an object that represents something you have not fully named yet. At 16 weeks, she received a brief email. She did not recognize the sender name at first, but the subject line said only, "Narita, November." She opened it sitting at Camilla's kitchen table, with coffee going cold beside her. He had found her contact through her professional website, he explained. Her name was on her translation portfolio, and he was, he said, embarrassingly good at finding information he was looking for. He apologized if the contact was unwelcome. He said he had thought about their conversation several times and had hoped she was all right. He did not ask for anything. He did not suggest anything. He said, "I hope the flight home was bearable and that you found what you needed." She read it 3 times. Then she wrote back. What followed was not a courtship in the conventional sense. It was, for the first 2 months, almost entirely professional in tone, 2 adults with genuine intellectual interest in each other, exchanging messages about translation theory and organizational structure, and the particular challenge of building something durable inside systems that were not designed to be fair to you. He was direct and occasionally funny in the dry way of someone who had stopped caring about performing warmth and simply expressed it when it occurred naturally. She was equally direct and occasionally sharper than she expected, because she had stopped editing herself, and her real voice was coming back with a precision that startled even her. He flew to São Paulo on a trip that had professional pretexts and also did not. He told her when they met for dinner at a restaurant she chose that he had organizational business in Brazil that was real and that the timing was also deliberate and that he thought she deserved to know both things. She looked at him across the table and thought, "This is someone who finds honesty more efficient than performance." She said, "I appreciate that." He said, "I know you do. That's why I said it." She was 22 weeks pregnant by then. She did not minimize it or manage it, or prepare some kind of speech about the complexity of what she was carrying. She was visibly, plainly herself, which included the reality of a child coming, a life mid-construction, a strength she had rediscovered and was not going to sand down for anyone's comfort. He looked at all of it with the same clear attention he had given her on that airport floor. No performance of acceptance, just acceptance. He stayed in São Paulo for 4 days. They had 3 meals together, 1 long walk through a part of the city she loved, and 1 conversation that went until 2 in the morning on the terrace of a restaurant that had closed an hour earlier, while the staff quietly and patiently waited them out. In that conversation she asked him directly about his world, not the edges of it, but the center. She asked with the precision of someone who needed to understand the actual terrain before deciding if she was willing to move through it. He answered her directly. He told her what his organization was, how it operated, what he controlled, and what he didn't. He told her that the life attached to his name had a weight that could not be separated from his name. He told her that anyone who entered it needed to enter it with full knowledge, and that he would not ask anyone to do so without giving them the complete picture first. She listened to all of it. Then she said, "I'm not afraid of complicated. I spent 3 years afraid of simple, and I know which one I'd rather not repeat." He looked at her for a long moment. He said, "You are the most unusual person I have met in a very long time." She said, "I know." He said, "I mean that in the best possible way." She said, "I know that too." She did not make a decision that night. She did not make a decision for 3 more weeks, which was the right amount of time. She thought about it with the same rigor she gave to complex translations, looking at every layer, testing the structure, finding the places where things might not hold and deciding if she trusted the overall architecture anyway. She called Camilla. She called no one else because Camilla was the only person she trusted to tell her the truth without the filter of their own feelings about it. Camilla said, "Do you feel like yourself with him?" Nadia thought about it. She said, "More than I have in a long time." Camilla said, "Then the rest is logistics." Nadia said, "The logistics are significant." Camilla said, "Logistics always are." She wrote to him on a Tuesday evening. She said she had thought about it carefully and that she wanted to continue, whatever continuing meant in practical terms, and that she had conditions. He wrote back the same evening, "I'd expect nothing less. Tell me." Her conditions were 3. She would not relocate until she was ready. The child came first, the foundation of her own life came first, and she would not sacrifice either for speed. He said, "Agreed." She would maintain her professional work independently, completely, with no financial entanglement that could be used as leverage in any direction. He said, "I would have insisted on this myself." And she would always tell him the truth, including the hard truths, and he would do the same, and neither of them would perform a version of themselves designed to keep the other comfortable at the cost of honesty. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That last one may be the most difficult thing you have ever asked anyone." She said, "I know." He said, "I accept it." Their daughter was born on a Thursday in late March, in a private hospital in São Paulo, in the particular chaos and astonishing quiet that comes in the moment after. Nadia held her for the first minutes alone because she had wanted that, the first meeting just for the 2 of them. Her daughter had Nadia's forehead and a pair of dark eyes that seemed to be trying, even in those first minutes, to understand exactly where they had arrived. Nadia looked at her and felt something she did not have a word for, in any of the 4 languages she spoke. The closest she could get was irreversible. As in, there is no going back to the person I was before this. And I am not sorry. Kenji was in the waiting room. He had flown in 2 days earlier. He had not asked if he should come, that he had simply said he intended to be there unless she told him not to, and she had not told him not to. He walked in when she called him in. He looked at the baby with the complete stillness of a man who had not expected to be moved by something and had been moved completely. He did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, in Japanese, something that Nadia understood. It translated approximately as, "She's already the most serious person in the room." Nadia laughed. It was the first real laugh she had felt in her body since before she could remember. The baby, startled by the sound, opened her eyes wider. They both looked down at her, looking back up at them. It was not a perfect moment, it was better than that, it was real. There is a version of this story that is about being rescued. There is a version where a powerful man saves a helpless woman, and she is grateful and small, and everything resolves because of him. That is not this story. It never was. Nadia was not helpless on that airport floor. She was exhausted and scared and alone, and she was also completely capable of getting on her plane without him. She had already made the hard choice. She had already done the work of leaving. She was already, in every real sense, on her way. What he gave her, what the best kind of witness gives you, was not rescue. It was recognition. He looked at her in a moment when she was doing the bravest thing she had ever done, and he named it, simply and without ceremony, as courage. He sat down next to her on a floor because she needed someone beside her and not above her. He gave her back for 11 minutes the experience of being fully seen by someone who wanted nothing in return for the seeing. That is rarer than rescue. That is, in fact, harder to find. Nadia went back to work full-time when her daughter was 4 months old, from an apartment she had chosen herself in a neighborhood she loved. The work was good. Her name, in professional circles, was beginning to carry the weight she had spent years building. She traveled with her daughter when the projects required it. She did not make herself smaller for anyone. She did not translate herself into a quieter version for ease of consumption. She was entirely inconveniently, specifically herself. And it turned out that the people worth keeping in her life did not find that inconvenient at all. She and Kenji did not rush. They built something slowly. With the attention of 2 people who had both been inside relationships, they had treated as destinations instead of constructions. They knew the difference now. Construction requires honesty at every joint. It requires checking the load-bearing walls regularly. It requires being willing to stop and say, "This part is not right. We need to fix it before we go any further." They were both, as it happened, very good at structural work. She thought sometimes about the floor of that airport, the cold, polished floor and her bag, pulled against her knees and her hand on her stomach, and the absolute certainty that she was not going to cry. She thought about the specific freedom of that moment, not the fear, but the freedom inside the fear, the way it had felt against all expectation to finally be moving in only one direction, away from what was diminishing her, towards something she could not yet name. She had named it now. It was not a man, and it was not a place, and it was not even precisely a feeling. It was the version of herself she had stopped translating, the one that used too much space and asked too many questions and refused to minimize her own clarity for someone else's comfort, the one who sat on airport floors when she needed to and stood completely upright when she needed to and knew with absolute certainty the difference. She had carried that version of herself through everything. She had never quite left it behind, even when she had tried, even when Davi had quietly suggested for 3 years that it was a little much. It was not a little much. It was exactly enough. It had always been exactly enough. And if you have ever made yourself smaller to fit inside someone else's idea of who you should be, if you have ever translated the loudest, most honest part of yourself into something easier for someone else to hold, then you already know what this story is really about. You already know what it feels like to finally stop, to pick up your bag, to book the flight, The question is never whether you are brave enough to leave something that is slowly diminishing you. The question is whether you will recognize the moment when you already are. Nadia did, on a cold floor in Narita, with her hand on her stomach and her eyes dry and everything uncertain, and one thing, the most important thing, completely clear. She was already leaving. She had already chosen. Everything else was just the beginning of what came next. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who might need it today. Leave a comment telling us what part hit hardest. We read every single one. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is the time, because the next story is already waiting, and it starts in the last place you'd expect.